Thank you, Clara and Sophie and everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Clara mentioned, my experiences with high street brands. So I've worked with the likes of Coat, most recently doing a MAP contract at Gails, and so, and Café Rouge. But I also have experience working with healthy fast food startups such as Pod, sadly no longer, but was a bit of an innovator back in the day. But perhaps more importantly, and more interestingly, also with the corporate catering world. So having spent 2.5 years at Restaurant Associates, which is part of Compass, so understanding that contract catering. I first met Clara, now about 18 months ago in a pre-COVID world. And when we were talking about Kitchen Social, and the shout went out, has anybody got any help or know anything, or how could you help us? And I approached Clara, particularly wearing my corporate contract catering hat on, because I know from big businesses and from corporate caterers who have, not only do they have great clients who are very interested in ESG, CSR, putting back into the community, but also in the old world, when you think about summer holidays, that that's the quietest time, particularly in that corporate catering world. So you suddenly have operational rotas where you're suddenly got lots of chefs and you kind of want people to take time off. And it felt to me like there was a really obvious synergy there between tapping into big corporates, big clients who are really keen to be seen to be authentically, I add, playing their role in the community and giving back. So I think that is still a really interesting element to food. My experience, and I'm sure my co-speakers will reference, some of the biggest challenges that the hospitality industry has is a lack of chefs. And actually this is sort of thinking long term, but it's actually chefs and getting people into food. And so for me, I think there's a really exciting opportunity and an absolute need to infuse children today into food, what food is, what great food is, before you even start going on and it's really good for you. Because I think probably Alison will find this as well. When you're talking to people and families, people don't want to be don't already lectured and, you must eat this, it's fresh is best, or it's all about, it's got to be nutritious. You've got to find that right level of engagement. And I felt, and I still feel, that actually there is I know within the chefing world, I'm sure Rachel and Alice know this, chefs are really passionate about educating and sharing that love of food. So I think anybody who is involved in hospitality, 9 times out of 10 comes at it because they are passionate about people, but passionate about that love of food. So I still think, even in this sort of strange world that is slightly different that we live in, that the corporate world is absolutely there to support and keen to get involved at a local level. And when last year, when I was talking to contacts of mine within the big catering companies, and talking to those chef directors and pitching Kitchen Social and what it meant at a grassroots level, I mean, the response was phenomenal. It was like, yes, how can we get involved? So it still feels like there is the opportunity to push at an open door. So I do feel that, and I know being very practical, if you're talking, say, about a large contract caterer who has a specific educational arm, the chefs and the teams there are actually, their contracts and their hours are built around the summer holidays. So perhaps for them, they have chosen specifically perhaps to work in that sector because of their own need at home and childcare and their own life choice. However, I think this is where the corporates come in. Within the corporate world, there are still offices open, there are canteens still open, and I think this is a massive opportunity of how to get in and approaching it with the approach of it's getting into the community, supporting your community, getting involved. As I say, big corporates, massively important to them and to their shareholders actually is ESG, that social part that they have to, that important part they play in society, and education. And I think there is a massive, as I say, I won't repeat myself too much, but it's a big opportunity. And probably in the Q&A you can ask me a bit more about that and how that might be relevant. But I think also then within the sort of corporate is the big supply chain. And I know obviously Rachel will work, and probably Alice will work with those big food supply chains. I know during COVID, actually, it was the supply chain. It wasn't just hospitality that got shut down, it's the supply chain. And actually that playing that part and feeding the food banks and getting involved in community, but from the food up the supply chain was incredibly important, because you have to keep it moving. So there are a number of big companies who are on that distribution side, are absolutely willing to get involved, and they absolutely have shown their commitment during these tricky times. So there is a route there. Thinking of holiday provision, and probably the biggest challenge that you have is that consistency for the right amount of period, particularly those summer holidays, which is what we're rolling into now, is that 6 weeks. So what also you're going to need is that consistency of supply. And then obviously it comes down to how you talk about food. And I know, you know, as a marketer, it's very easy to use very fluffy, exciting words, but I think the most successful campaigns that I have been involved in a private and a public sector have come from just a very, very honest, authentic point of view, but creating that excitement and provenance and education without it being, as I say, I think, you know, the tendency to it's better, it's nutritious, fresh is better, isn't necessarily always helpful, particularly for families who are time poor. Not only are they perhaps budget poor, time poor, you don't want to patronize. So it's about factual, it's about less is more, but careful choice of language, but making it fun. I think that is that's the element that has to be dialed up, rather than sort of talking down, and those words and however you craft it is really, really important. So for me, it's less is more. I come at it from a less is more, step back, think about how you would like to be spoken to. Or food is fuel. We all know that. Better, there are some foods that are better than each other, but it's about pulling those people together and creating that fun, how exciting, taking them on the journey. And I think, and getting getting that language right is important. Don't overcomplicate, I suppose, and I wouldn't patronize. How am I doing for time? I'm sort of mindful.
That in terms of timing, you're absolutely bang on 10 minutes.
Okay, so I do think I'm going to hand over. I think perhaps I might be better also in the Q&A. People might have specific questions. How do I approach these corporates? How do I? So I'm going to hand over to who will I hand over to?
So we're going to hear from Rachel next. I think I'm starting to realise from your 10 minutes, Victoria, that we very easily could have just done an hour with each of you. But as we've got quite a few people from councils on the call from across London, and unfortunately, for all of them, time is a premium as we bowl into the summer holidays. And so I think today, you know, we unfortunately do have a shorter session, and we are just getting these bite-sized bits of information, but also perhaps thinking also about easy wins and things that we're able to accomplish before summer or before Christmas, rather than perhaps some of the longer term stuff for 2022. So thank you so much, Victoria. And we're going to go over to Rachel now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me and I'm off mute now. So I'm here today representing the London Food Alliance, which is a collaboration between the Felix Project, Fair Share Go, and City Harvest. So I'll try wherever I can to give you answers that broadly cover surplus food distribution. And I'm sure many of you have already been engaged with one or more of us in some context. I think one of the interesting things about surplus food provision, to pick up on a couple of comments that Victoria made, is we can certainly help to make things interesting, because the nature of surplus food is very much that you never know quite what you're going to get until the shutters open and we open up our warehouses, and then we resort all of that and send it out to yourselves and the projects that you're involved in. So from that perspective, I think it's really important, if you're going to consider using surplus food, that you do think about whether or not you've got the capacity and the capability to work in a real ready, steady cook kind of way, because that is very much what surplus food will offer you. It's not possible to work with surplus food in the context of having a menu plan that you might like to work with over the summer holidays. You could certainly say on a Monday we'll do a salad, and on a Tuesday we'll do a curry, and on a Thursday we'll do a pasta dish. But what the ingredients of going into those items are, it will be very, very different depending on what the food is that we've been able to supply you with, and you would need to supply some of the core basics. So I think the main thing to think about with surplus food is it can provide a really, really useful supplement to the core items that you need to look to provide yourselves, or find other providers to help you with. I would advise anyone not to rely on surplus food. And I know this sounds really bizarre, but I think particularly with regard to holiday programs where you want to make sure that you've got the nutritional element, where you've usually got several dozen children that you've got to feed in a very short space of time, relying on us, unless you've got a really good set of chefs who can do ready, steady cook every day, will make your lives far more challenging. But don't ignore us, because we are a really fantastic source of fresh produce. We are a fantastic source of protein, of fruit, of vegetables. And like I say, we can make life really interesting for you, and we can supply you with things that you wouldn't necessarily go out and buy. So I'm just thinking about what we've had come through the warehouses recently, and it's things like mangoes. They're really expensive, but if you've got a surplus supply coming in, then all of a sudden you can start talking to the kids about mango smoothies, mango hedgehogs, you know, mango salads, mango skewers, and all kinds of things. In terms of the food that's available, the majority of the food that we have available is really suited well to being prepped and cooked and prepared. We've gone through this period over the last 14-15 months where we've had a supply of non-perishable store cupboard staples. That's all now come to an end pretty much, because the DEFRA funded food buy has ended. So think of surplus food about being the consumable types of food that you could use. So as I said, fresh produce, fresh fruit, protein, sometimes it's meat, sometimes it's vegetarian, very rarely fish at the moment, but you never know, and those kinds of things. In terms of working with surplus food as well, I would advise you all to consider making sure that you've got chilled and frozen capacity where you're going to be running the projects, because if it is the case that we send you some wonderful produce but you can't use all of it straight away, you don't want to get to the situation that you have to throw that food away because its date life doesn't allow you to wait until the next session that you're running. So if you've got your freezers ready to hand, if you've got your chillers ready to hand, then that really, really helps, because it gives you the capacity to potentially cook the food and then turn it into ready meals, or a bulk batch meal that you could then work with on a later date. And again, that's a really good way of working and getting the young adults and young children involved in the preparation of the food, is you can actually get them involved, and you can start to talk to them about bulk buying and how you can take something that looks about as if it's about to expire and turn it into a meal or freeze it and that kind of stuff. So from a life skills point of view, again, really, really super useful. As you're all probably aware, with surplus food, we can never guarantee what we're going to get and when we're going to get it. So whilst most of us will try and do a profile of you, so we understand your facilities, we understand what days of the week you're operating, number of children, age range of children. As I said, it's not really possible for us to create a shopping list for you, but we can certainly try to tailor what you need as much as possible. Having those kitchen facilities, though, is really important. And I know we sometimes find ourselves a little bit challenged to work with those organisations that are in things like adventure playgrounds, where there's one domestic under-counter fridge, but you've got 300 children that you're seeing. And we know that we could give you 300 yogurts, but getting 300 yogurts into one domestic under-counter fridge doesn't always work out. So it is about those facilities. It is about trying to think about how can you prep things, how can you do that safely, how can you get the children involved to help you out, and those kinds of things, really. So I'm not going to say too much more, because I think probably the Q&A will bring more things to light in terms of what you're thinking about and how we can work with you. But surplus food, absolutely a valuable opportunity for you all, but don't rely on us. Make sure you've got your core and some fantastic cooks.
Wonderful, Rachel, thank you so much. Alice, let's go straight over to you, my love. And then I have a sense that the Q&A is going to be very busy and very dynamic. So I think you're right that we'll get lots and lots of questions in there. So Alice, over to you, love.
I'm actually going to present with Duncan on the call as well.
In that case, over to both you and Duncan.
We just got a presentation to share just to make life easier.
Hi, everyone. So a few slides just to help us talk through what we're going to cover today. So I'm Duncan from Shift. We've been working in food for a long time. So we're a research and design innovation charity, and we've been doing ethnographic human-led research in the area of food and childhood obesity for nearly 10 years. And in that time have also launched a number of different food interventions into the marketplace, which were originally more focused, actually always around young people and children, and then latterly looking more at takeaway before we've launched the offer we want to talk to you about today and explain some of our experience of today, which is called Medleys. And so Medleys is, it offers delicious and nutritious meals through local food distributors. So we build, highly, nutritious, well-balanced meals, and we distribute them via hubs that provide food within the community, and have recently been working with Southwark Council, providing their holiday provision, Easter holiday provision. And we wanted to just tell you a little bit today about some of the things we learned doing that, because we learned a lot, and we are particularly I guess proud of the relationship we built with Southwark, working with them. We wanted to tell you how that worked and what you might be able to learn from it. So Southwark came to us in quite a targeted way to get inviting us to tender for their Easter provision. At quite short notice, thinking about they wanted to do it differently, and they wanted to really focus in on trying to get a provider who really understood local food needs. And Alice will tell you a bit more about how we've done that in a second. So we were able to clearly communicate with them quickly about how we might be able to help them out, and had a couple of quick meetings with them to work out whether it's possible for us to supply them, which it turned out it was, and they were happy to go ahead. And what we got from Southwark from the beginning was an active facilitation of the relationship that we needed to build quickly with the hubs, with the 20 odd locations that they wanted us to serve through to provide the Easter food. And they were very good at focusing, understanding what their roles as to helping us facilitate that relationship with those hubs. We were able to deliver the provision, owning that relationship with the hubs, having been sort of facilitated by the council. But as we went through that delivery, actually had really engaged council team who were alongside us, actively helping us problem solve in the 3 weeks we were delivering food to the hubs. And then when we finished delivery of the Easter provision, Southwark were on the front foot with us about asking us for feedback about what they could do better. They really wanted to understand what they could improve about how they contracted for this sort of provision. And we were able, therefore, with that sort of invitation, to provide some very detailed feedback on what was good and bad about our provision, and particularly allowed us to open up our P&L. We completely showed them our profit and loss and the economics for doing the service, so they could really learn about, understand the implications of some of the things they said around pricing or some of the other implications of what they specified in the contract. And that has meant that they have proactively adjusted their summer contract in order to take some of those things that we fed back into account. So we've seen them actively listen and adjust what they do. So we got the understanding from some that this isn't the way they've always worked, but it felt like it was a really productive two-way relationship in terms of how food could be provided. Alice, do you want to jump in with some of the things we learned?
Yeah, so just to say, before we started, we did in-depth interviews with mums in Southwark about food preferences, and especially around culture preferences and family occasions, especially over Easter. That was quite a big deal about different meats that people ate, and just different kind of celebratory foods. We were also trying as much as possible in the kind of short time that if we were to do it for summer, it would be more in depth, to understand from the community organisations the age groups and the demographics that we would be feeding. We got the recipes from the community and tweaked them to kind of adjust different parts of it, like fats and sugars and salts, and then tested them again to make sure that we hadn't really just butchered the recipes with those tweaks. The kind of three things that came up here were, and it's back to what Victoria was saying at the start, that like it doesn't really care, no one cares about healthiness and nutrition as a messaging point of view, and actually it's all about being fun and colour and taste, and trying to communicate that, like make it competition, make it how many colours can you get on your plate, or how many colours can you eat, or yeah, move it away from the finger wagging. Do you want to go to the next slide there? This, I'm going to really whiz through this, but this is just like how in depth we went with each of the hubs and how in depth we would go for the summer provision, just to really understand the way that hubs like to be communicated with. Lots of people really didn't enjoy being communicated by email, and they would have preferred WhatsApp or just an actual printout because they weren't very comfortable. So it was like getting quite specific with how people wanted to be communicated with. And then the flexibility that we were allowed to give, or we were able to give when people were changing orders. So we can share this afterwards if anyone's interested, but do you want to go to the next slide there? So, and I feel awkward saying this with Victoria here, having worked for contract caterers, but we found, and we did rent a kitchen for this, and so that's part of it, but for us, £2.50, if you're working with a local organisation, wasn't enough per meal to break even with the supplies that we're using and to meet the desirable criteria that the council had put in place, which were things like eco delivery and eco packaging. Eco packaging came out at like 18-19p per meal, and so that, you know, the build up is quite large for that. The council then listened to this and have put it up to £3 per meal for the summer tender, and for a local business, if they were to be doing it, margins would be met more easily. We have been talking with Southwark about next year the potential of breaking up the tender and using local organisations and local businesses to deliver the food, and so breaking up that tender. And they have done this sort of for the summer, so breaking it up into hot delivered or hot delivered, cold delivered packed lunches, so that you could apply for a part of the tender. Next one. There was a kind of push on plant-based from Southwark, but everyone ordered meat, like 80% of people ordered meat. And so we spoke about maybe putting in a quota so that we can control costs, but also that there's just kind of a forced plant-based meal going out there. Next one, what is next? Yeah, and also to Victoria's point about education, it's massive. Like a big part of it was kids not recognising food. And so I think it just has to come into play when the food is being supplied somehow. And it would be great to, if the suppliers and the council and packaging company, whatever it is, can have some kind of process there. Next. Again, can send this later, so we're probably running out of time. But this is a process. So the reason that we work in a small area, and we're trying as like a kind of system-wide approach to how we're looking at food. It's looking at all parts of it. And very much with Southwark, we're looking at the partner agreement, the tender, and how that affects the kitchen, the marketplace, and where the food's eventually eaten. And should we skip this? I feel like we don't have time.
Yeah, I think just showing the role we see we can play, isn't it? Organisations like ours can play, which is to maybe provide a single point of contracting for local authorities over their holiday provision or other food provision needs, but doing that in a way that can, our aim is that we can aggregate local production and local food producers and chefs to provide a single point of contracting, but in a way that a very small local food producer never could. And so our ambition is to play the role we played with Southwark, but have a model which can go further than even we did, which is, you know, engaging with communities to build the food proposition, but also use local chefs, but actually bring in nascent local or small brands, etc., and have that collected together and open up those markets which traditionally have only ever gone to contract catering sort of solutions for very sort of understandable reasons. And that's it.